Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all and welcome to the channel. In this video we will discuss I am sorry. I just saw uh, a rather stupid gathering on the news on YouTube, and just seeing what they were protesting and arguing about was quite dumb, so I should not have watched this video before I started the recording. Anyways, today we will be discussing jagged arrays, and this will be the final episode for the array subseries, at least at the beginner level. We will continue discussing arrays inshallah as we progress through the different levels of this course, the intermediate and advanced, or just advanced depending on how I decide to progress with the course. But before we begin, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وارض اللهم عنا معهم أجمعين اللهم آمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. We begin in the name of Allah, the most merciful in this life and in the hereafter, and we thank Him for all of His blessings that He has bestowed upon us, for they are innumerable, and we pray that we follow in the footsteps of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his fellow companions. Amen. We also ask for prayers and blessings to be bestowed upon Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family, as they were bestowed upon Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and his family. Amen. Now, with jagged arrays, normally they behave with regards to the output, of course, because you can only display a jagged array as an output. They behave as a multi-dimensional array, as in they are displayed as a multi-dimensional array, or they suffer iteration in a similar fashion to multi-dimensional arrays. But as we have discussed throughout this course related to multi-dimensional arrays, for simplicity we will use a two-dimensional array for today's example بإذن and God willing. Now, what is a jagged array? When you create a two-dimensional array, you have an array with two dimensions. You have the rows, which represent the length of the array, and the columns, which would represent the width of the array, like so. So you have the two dimensions here, the length and the width, though in programming it is height and width as opposed to length and width. Sadly, because we are weak and we are the defeated, we have to abide by the rules of the powerful and the strong, because they write the law. We do not have the power, so we cannot create a law. We simply abide by the law, and thus we are oppressed by the law. So as we are the ones who lack the power to create a programming language as Java, we have to abide by the laws of Java and other programming languages, of course. For example, JavaScript does not have length and width, it is height and width, and so on and so forth. Though you may confuse yourself between height and length, the length instance variable for the array class. I am referring to graphical user interface designs. When you are designing, for example, a window in Java, it would be height and width. I believe, yeah, I do not think it has length. If it does, please let me know. Anyways, how do I convert this to a jagged array? It would look like so. The reason it is called a jagged array is because it has jagged edges, as you will see in just a moment. So here we have the rows, and here you have the columns. Yeah, this is good. Okay, then we start deleting. There, 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 and there. So as you can see, we have created jagged edges similar to those uncooperative pieces in Tetris. This is known as a jagged array. And actually, the pieces you see in Tetris are an example of jagged array as well, because you have an array of small squares. So this would be considered an array, for example, because it is a group of blocks. This looks hideous. Okay, before we start with an example, I would like to inform you that, as far as I know, there are two methods by which you can create a jagged array. If you know more, please share this knowledge in the comments below so that we can all benefit. Now let us return to IntelliJ and start with the two methods. We will cover the easiest one first. At least from my perspective, I feel this is the easiest one. Then we will cover the more complex one. I will create a single one-dimensional array. I know we mentioned that jagged arrays behave as multi-dimensional arrays here, but you will see why I am using a one-dimensional array. This will be rendered redundant later on, but I wish to use it simply to reinforce and cement a topic that we have discussed before, just to refresh the information. Now, what I wish to create is a right angle triangle with the asterisk special character. It is the asterisk, not the obelisk. Well, I do not know if people would know asterisk and obelisk. Perhaps they do. I honestly do not know. Okay, so here is what I wish to create. The output would look like so. Star and star, star. Like so. Though the number of rows may differ, but this is basically what I aim to create. A better version of the American flag, mainly because I hate America and the American flag, but though my hatred is justified, believe me. And the Americans hate themselves too, so anyways. Okay, so I will leave this as a fiduciary. Let us start with the first method of jagged array creation. Because we are using a two-dimensional array as an example, how many for loops would we need to iterate through it? Forget that this is a one-dimensional array. It does not affect what we will create right now. If we have 2 dimensions, we will need 2 for loops. If we have 3 dimensions, then we will need 3 for loops, and so on and so forth. But for this example, we will use 2 dimensions. And here we will have int I is equal to 0. Then I is less than the length of this array, which is array.length, I plus plus. Then we will apply this here, int j is equal to 0. J is less than I, j plus plus. Before we continue with this, I would just like to show you how this would appear. You see, it printed the stars vertically. Here's the command to run it. This is where the JDK is located. And then you see the stars are aligned. Now people will think I speak astrologically. Zodiac is nothing but mumbo jumbo. I could create my own zodiac and say the butterfly that is trapped in a spider. There, I created a zodiac. Okay, so do not worry, I will explain this in detail in a bit. I just would like for you to see the output beforehand, then I will start explaining. So we will execute. As you can see, it is the same as before. It is vertically. That is because I have it set as print line. But since this will print it all on the same line, I wish to create space between them. So I will add an empty space like so. Execute. Now everything is horizontal. How do I organize it into different lines? After the inner for loop finishes, within the outer for loop, we will add an empty line. This empty line will create a new line between every outer loop iteration. So these two will be on a separate line, these three will be on a separate line, and so on and so forth. And there we have it. This is the shape, the right angle triangle. Take note of this empty line that we have here. If you recall from the previous executions, the star was followed the command to run the program immediately. But here there is an empty line. Take note of that because we will cover that in the upcoming explanation. Now let us explain what has transpired here. So I will remove all of this because I need the space. I will write the outer for loop with one color and the inner for loop with another color. That way it is as clear as I can relay. There are of course obstacles because I am teaching online and there is a lack of student-teacher interactivity, so of course these create hindrances. I will use green for the inner for loop. There we go. Now the outer for loop will be int I is equal to 0. Then I is less than, before we continue, I would like to return here. What is array.length? The length of the array is the size of the array, or rather the number of elements within the array, which is this. Now since this is an empty array, they are filled with zeros. Because this is an integer, we will cover the null value, the default null values of the various variables, whether they are primitive or reference data types later on, inshallah. Actually, now that I remembered this, I would like to add it to my list of topics. Let me just add it quickly. Null values for variables. There we go. Hopefully I can finish recording this soon, بإذن and God willing. Okay. So the array.length here is of value 10. But remember, I represents the index of each element. The index of the last element is always the length of the array minus 1. So the last element has an index of 9, which means that index 10 does not exist in this array. Is that what it? Yeah, It is always false because 10 is not less than 10. It is equal to 10. So the indices available are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, until 9. That is the end. So that is why I wish to create this array, simply to remind you of that fact. But we do not need this. I can simply write 10 here. I do not need the array that I created originally. So I will use 10 here instead of array.length. And then I plus plus. Remember, it can be plus plus I. If it is plus plus I, the incrementation of I takes place before the execution of the for loop. If it is a postfix, it takes place after the execution of the for loop, as we have discussed in the incrementation and decrementation operator lectures. There is a delay in the postfix, but if it is a prefix, it is an immediate change. Now within the inner for loop, it will be int j as part of the convention. Of course, these are arbitrarily named, but conventionally, the outer for loop is labeled I, and then the inner for loops acquire the letters in ascending alphabetical order from I. So it is J, K. I'll just drink some water. I do not know if anyone reached Z before in inner for loops. So I do not know what happens if you reach Z. Probably start with A. J less than I. We will discuss why we have that set. J plus plus. And within this, we have system.out.print, not print line. And here we will display the asterisk without the obelisk and the empty space. Then outside the inner for loop, we have a line here for the outer for loop, system.out.println, to create an empty line. There we go. Now I will use a different color for the value of I and a different color for the value of j, so that you can track the changes throughout the iterations. Maybe this would be a bit too bright. How about this? Yeah, I feel this is a good color. Perhaps we can... I feel this is a good color, or a good contrast. I do not remember the color wheel, to be quite honest. Okay. Now remember, as we have discussed in the nested for loops lecture, when you have an outer and an inner for loop, the outer for loop executes once, then all of the iterations within the inner for loop execute instantly. After that, the outer for loop executes its second iteration, then the inner for loop executes fully. Then the outer for loop executes its third iteration, and for that third iteration, the inner for loop executes fully. So for example here, we have 10 iterations from 0 to 9. And let us pretend this is j less than 5. For the first iteration, the inner for loop will iterate 5 times completely. Then, for the second iteration, the inner for loop executes 5 times completely. Then for the third iteration, this executes 5 times completely. For the fourth, for the fifth, for the sixth, until you reach I is equal to 9. This will execute, which is the last iteration, of course. This will execute 5 times fully, and then the program ends. Now, let us start with the outer for loop. Here, I is equal to 0. Is 0 less than 10? That is true. Then the compiler transforms control of the program flow from the outer for loop to the inner for loop. And remember, Java is a procedurally interpreted and compiled language, as in the lines of code are compiled ordinally, depending on their order. So the first line is compiled first, then the second line, then the third line, and so on and so forth. So if this was before the for loop, this would execute first, and then this would be executed secondly. So this would execute firstly, and this would execute secondly. But the inner for loop is before this statement, so this will execute firstly. Now, here we have j is equal to 0. Is j less than 0? That is false. 0 is equal to 0. It is not less than 0, which means that this entire iteration is skipped. If a for loop is skipped entirely because this is false, so if this is false, the compiler does not enter the for loop. It skips it immediately. If a for loop is skipped, this does not occur. So j is not incremented anymore. Now, since this is skipped because this relationship is false, control is then transferred to the outer for loop. This is executed successfully. And when this is executed, it prints this line. This empty line is printed because of this skipped iteration. When this is skipped, you have this, which yields this empty line. This is why I told you to take note of it. After this first iteration of the inner for loop and outer for loop, then we will start printing. So let us cover that. After the empty line is printed, we have I++. So let us increment I by 1. Since this is a new iteration of the outer for loop, the counter for j resets. But since it was already 0, it never incremented, it will stay 0. Now, is 1 less than 10? True. Then the compiler enters the inner for loop. Is 0 less than 1? True. The compiler will enter here and then print the lonely asterisk and the empty space, of course, which is this part and this part. So if I move the cursor with the arrow keys, this is printed and then an empty space is printed, which is this part right here. Since this has been executed successfully, j is then incremented by 1. So we will increment this by 1. I will not iterate through the for loop completely to avoid wasting your time, but I will iterate 2 to 3 times so that the idea is clear, or the concept is clear. Now, j will the inner for loop will execute again because it still did not finish. Is 1 less than 1? False. So skip this and print this. That is why in this scenario we only have 1 star printed. Then it moves on to the second line. Now that we are on the second line, it is time for the for loop to increment I once more. So now I is equal to 2. I think I used this color. Yeah. I is equal to 2. And because this is a new iteration of I, the count here resets to 0. So this is 0. Okay. so that it can start its iteration from the beginning, since it is an inner for loop. Is 2 less than 10? True. Enter the inner for loop. Is 0 less than 2, which is I? This is why we have created I here. That is also true. Execute this and print this asterisk. So now we are here. We are still, and the space, of course. So now we are here. Since this executed successfully, increment j by 1. So we will increment j by 1, like so. Is j less than 2? Correct. Print this again, which is this one, and the space, of course. Since this executed successfully, increment j by 1. So we will increment j by 1, which is now 2. Now, is 2 less than 2? That is false. So skip this entirely and move on to the next line. So now we are here. Then increment I by 1. And since we are moving to the next iteration of I, let me write the number before I forget. 3. This will reset to 0 again. For every outer for loop iteration, the inner for loop resets its index or counter. Which color did I use? Red. So this becomes 0 again, like so. Now, is 3 less than 10? Correct. Enter the inner for loop. Is 0 less than 3? Also correct. Print the asterisk and the space. Then increment j by 1. So this will move from 0 to 1, like that. Is 1 less than 3? Correct. Print the second one, which is this and the space, of course. Then increment j by 1. Take note that we are still in index 3 for the for loop. So where did we start? 2, yes. So now we are at 2, from 1 to 2. There we go. Now, is 2 less than 3? Correct. Print the third star or asterisk and the space, of course. So now we are here after the space. And increment j by 1, like so. So now j is 3. Is j less than 3? Is 3 less than 3? That is false. So skip this entirely and move on to the next line. So now we are here where the cursor is. So I will finish this iteration and then I will move on to the next method because I believe it is clear now. But I will just cover one more iteration. So now increment I by 1. So this means this becomes 4. Like so. And since this is a new iteration for the outer for loop, this resets to 0. Because the inner for loop finishes all of its iterations completely. So it resets with every new iteration of the outer for loop. Now, is 4 less than 10? Correct. move into the inner for loop. Enter the outer for loop and then enter the inner for loop. Is 0 less than 4? Correct. Print a star. I needed to do this. Print a star and the space. So now we are here. Then increment j by 1. So this will be 1. There we go. Now is 1 less than 4? Correct. Print the second star and the space. So now we are at this location where the cursor is. And then increment j by 1. So we will delete this or erase this to be more accurate, and we will add 2 like so. Is 2 less than 4? Correct. Print another star and space. So we are currently here where the cursor is. And then increment j by 1. So this becomes 3. Now is 3, where's the brush? Is 3 less than 4? Correct. Print another star and space. So now we are here where the cursor is. Then increment j by 1. So this will become, we were 3, so 4. There we go. Now, is 4 less than 4? False. So skip this and move on to the next line. So now we are here. And you can repeat the same for all remaining lines. I just wanted to finish at index 4 to try to be as clear as I can possibly be. So that is the first method where you have j less than I. Instead of j less than a particular number, it is less than the outer for loop itself. This is how you create a jagged array. Now, let us cover a second example, or rather the second method. Okay, so what I want to do is, we'll call it array is equal to new int, and yeah, okay, let us say 10. 10, 10, yeah. Then I will say for int I is equal to 0. I is less than array I dot length I plus plus. Oh, sorry, I just want array dot length, so the number of rows, not the number of columns. And here I will say array I. Why did I write a? Array I is equal to new I plus 1. New int, sorry. Do not worry, I will explain this later on. I just want to display the output. Then we can discuss the mechanics. For okay, let us see, int I is equal to 0. I is less than array dot length I plus plus. Then int j is equal to 0. J is less than the row length, and j plus plus. Remember, because this is a two-dimensional array, this is accessing an array element. So a row, basically. This is the length of one row. And this is the length of the entire array, which is the number of rows. So let us say I wish to print. Let us go with the stars again. A star is born. Oh, I need to add the space. And then there. There. We have the same pattern. However, take note that we do not have an empty space here. The appearance begins immediately after the command is executed. So, what I will do is I will transfer this to the code and to Paint, sorry, and we will discuss it diagrammatically as we have discussed the first method. But before we move, what is the value of array.length? As we have mentioned previously, if you are accessing the length property, sorry, that is JavaScript, the length instance variable of a two-dimensional array, you are accessing the number of rows or the number of array elements, which is 10. If you are accessing a particular array element and you want the length of that array element, it is the number of columns or the number of individual elements within an array element. So the number of individual elements within a single array element. So each array element out of the 10 array elements, each array element contains 10 individual elements. So 10 columns and 10 rows, like that. Okay. So is it possible to create, to substitute the values here with tens? So this will be 10, this will be 10, and this will be 10. Let us execute this and see. Oh, it does not work, but at least it printed the array as I wanted. So we will return these. And the reason it did not work is because I need this line. And you will see why in just a moment. But you saw how to display a proper rectangle. Okay, so let us transfer this code to Paint. So now I have two for loops, and the pivotal portion is this one right here. So let us start with the creation of this array, then the two for loops. Technically 3, but since this is an inner for loop, I counted it as part of this. So let us create the array. Int array is equal to new int 10 rows or 10 array elements and 10 columns or 10 individual elements per array element. I'll just leave this here because I do not truly need it. Then we will cover the first for loop, which is the most important one, or rather it is pivotal in the creation of the jagged array. Perhaps I can move this title here since we know the name of the topic. For int I is equal to 0, I is less than array dot length, then I plus plus. Array is equal to new int I plus 1. And then we will use the green one for the outer for loop. And then we can use the dark blue one for the inner, for goodness sake, man, for the inner for loop. Okay, perfect. So I will just type in the inner for loop because it is annoying to switch colors in Paint within a text box. J is less than array I dot length j plus plus, and here we will write system dot out dot print the asterisk and the empty space. Then outside the for loop, system.out.println to start a new line every iteration, and here it will be int I is equal to 0, I is less than array dot length and then I plus plus. So I will change these colors so that they are unique. So for this one, I will use, I believe orange would be a nice contrast here. For this one, I will use red. And for this one, yellow might be a bit unclear. This might be a bit unclear too. Let us use brown. There we go. I will keep these here to remind you that we are referring to this array, but I will write their values above them for reference. So this is 10. This is also 10 because we have a square. It's 10 rows and 10 columns. And I may have to drag this downwards ever so subtly. Subtly and surreptitiously. 10. There we go. Okay, so we have created an empty array. Let us see what happens here. For int I is equal to 0, I is less than 10, so it is 9, which is sensical because the last index is always the array length minus 1. So it is 0 to 9. So this is correct. Or you can say less than or equal to array.length minus 1. Just remember the minus 1. So now I is, maybe I should use this color, yeah. I is 0. Is 0 less than 10? Correct. Then enter the for loop to execute it. This is selecting, since this is a two-dimensional array, and if you target the initial bracket, this one, which is this one, what are you targeting? The array elements or the individual elements? If you are targeting the first one, since this matches with this, you are targeting the array element, not the individual element. You are not targeting this, you are targeting this with this syntax, as we have discussed previously. So here, what I am declaring is creating or affecting the number of rows here by this. So instead of having it as 10, I have it as I plus 1. So I will leave this for reference and write the values as they change here. So I will use the green color. So I is 0 plus 1. So now I have an array, a new array for this, the first array element of size 1, which means that the first array element in this two-dimensional array no longer has 10 individual uh, 10 individual columns or 10 individual elements. It only has one element. So if I wish to divide this here, like so, now I am targeting a one-dimensional array. So array, the array element at index 0, the first array element of the 10, now has one element in it. So I will leave this here. 0 is this one, so I is equal to 0. You know what, I should copy this here, like so. And this is 0 plus 1, which is 1. So I created this for this array. And then you increment 1. So now what happens is this is no longer 0, this is 1, and these of course will change. So again, I will not iterate through the array fully to avoid being repetitively annoying or annoyingly repetitive. My throat is extremely dry today. So here it will be 1, which means that this is 1 too. Now, is 1 less than 10? True. Implement this. Oops. Oh man. Oh no. Copy, paste here. So now this becomes 1. This becomes 1 plus 1, and that is equal to 2. So now what I created is the second array element, or array element index 1, is equal to new int with how many elements in it? 2 elements. So now the first array element in this two-dimensional array has only one element instead of 10. It does not have all 10. Then the second array element of this two-dimensional array has only 2 elements instead of the full 10. You can probably see the pattern developing. Now, increment I after this is executed. Oh no. I hate Control Z sometimes. Array 1 is equal to new int 2. And I will try to align it like so. I will stop at 4, inshallah and God willing, just as I did with the previous method. So now let us increment I. So now I is, we stopped at 1, so now I is 2. And is 2 less than 10? Correct. Implement this. So now I here is 2 is equal to new int 2 plus 1. So now it is 3. Like so. So the third array element, or the array element of index 2, has how many elements? 3 elements. 3. Like so. So the purpose of this for loop is to reprogram this part. Instead of having all array elements to have 10 individual elements, I am customizing it so that the first array element has only 1 individual element, the second array element has 2 individual elements, and so on and so forth. After that is complete, increment I by 1. So we will delete this, delete this, delete this, and we will increment by 1. So now I is 3. Now is 3 less than 10? Correct. Implement this. Oops. Or as the Germans say, hoppla. I highly doubt they use that word, but now I is 3, so this is 3 plus 1, so new int 4. So this will be as follows here. Array 3 is equal to new int 4. So now the fourth, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth array element or array element at index 3 has 4 individual elements instead of 10. And as you can see, we will keep repeating this until we reach the 10th array element or array element index 9. But I am a man of my word, so we will continue until I is equal to 4. So once this is done, increment I by 1. So now I is 4. Is 4 less than 10? Correct. Implement this. So now this I is here, and this becomes 4 plus 1 is 5, like so. So this will appear as follows. Array at index 4, the array element at index 4 has 5 elements. And this will continue until I is equal to 9, because 9 is less than 10. 10 is not less than 10. So this will continue like so. And like that, like that, like that, like that, until you reach this line. Array index 9, which is the last one, is equal to new int 10 elements. So that is the purpose of this for loop. It is to create the array elements with their respective individual elements. Once this has been created, then you iterate through it as we did in the previous example. The only difference is, instead of saying j less than I, you are saying j is less than this I right here, which is exactly the same as we did in the previous example. We will iterate through this once or twice just to cement the information. I do not wish to prolong this video and cause an inconvenience for all of you. So we will iterate once or twice and we will end the video. So this is related to the first for loop, so we do not need it anymore since the array has been created. Now we want to iterate through the array and print the array. I will leave this as it is. So let us start with this one. Is 0 less than 10? Correct. Enter the inner for loop. Is 0 less than 10? Correct again. Print the star. Oh, sorry. You see, I made a mistake here. This is not 10. Why? Because, as you can see, each array element contains a different number of individual elements. So this will change. This is not constant. So that is a mistake here. I apologize for that. So if int I is equal to 0, what is array index 0 length? It is 1. Let me just remove this. I enjoy keeping everything tidy. There we go. Okay, just remove this as well. So what is the size of array 0, this one? It is 1. So this will actually be Let me choose this color. This will be 1. Perhaps that is too faint. That is similar shade. Okay. So is 0 less than 1? True. Print this. So you see, we did not skip an iteration as we did in the previous method. That is why it prints instantly. It does not skip an iteration. And of course, the empty space. Then increment increment j by 1. So this will become 1 as such. Now is 1 less than 1? False. So skip all of this and move on to the next line. So now we are here. Then increment I by 1. So we will finish this iteration and we will end the lesson for today, bi'idhnillah, and God willing. 1. This will remain constant because you have 10 array elements. This is flexible, as you can see here. The first one is 1, the second one is 2, and so on and so forth. Is 1 less than 10? Correct. Enter here. Now remember, this resets. Whenever the outer for loop increments by 1, the inner for loop resets. So j here is still 0. And this is array of 0. What is the length of array 0? It is 1 here. Perhaps I will use gray just to create a contrast. Now, is 0 less than 1? Correct. Print the star and the space. So now we are here where the cursor is. Then increment j by 1. So this becomes 1. But remember I deleted I accidentally removed this. I remains 1 because I is 1. So increment j by 1. So let us increment it. Oh yeah, so we said there's, sorry, I apologize. I got a bit lost from all of these colors. I am terribly sorry. I is now 1, so this is array 1, this one, not 0. So let me just remove this to avoid confusion. So now we are here. So the array length is actually 2, not 1. There we go. So initially, when this was 0, it was 0 less than 2, which is correct, and it printed this star and the space. So now we are here. Then j is incremented by 1. So now this is no longer 0, this is 1. Perfect. Yeah, I should have deleted this line to avoid confusing myself. Now is 1 less than 2? Correct. Print the second star, which is this one, and the space. So now we are here. Then increment j by 1. So we will remove this and type 2 here. Now is 2 less than 2? False. So skip all of this and move on to the next line here. Then this will reset to 0 because we finished its execution fully. So this will be 0 again. It resets. And this will increment by 1. So now it is I is equal to 2. And what is array of 2? So let me delete this to avoid confusing myself. I will finish this iteration and I will end it here just to compensate for the error I made previously. What is array of 2? The size or the length of array of index 2, it is 3. So this number will be 3. Now, is 0 less than 3? Correct. Print the first star and the space. So now we are here. Then increment j by 1. This of course will remain the same. So we will put a 1 here. Now, is 1 less than 3? Correct. Print another star and the space of course. So now we are here. Then increment j by 1. So now this is 2. Is 2 less than 3? Correct. Print another star, which is this one, and the space. So now we are here. And then increment j by 1. Now j is 3. Is 3 less than 3? That is false. So skip this entirely and print the next line. So now we are here. So we will delete all of these. I now jumps to, from 2, we incremented by 1. So now I is 3. And this of course resets because it finished execution fully. I was using brown. So this is 0 again. And now this is array of index 3, which is this one right here. This one. What is the length of array index 3? 4 elements. So we will remove this and paste 4 instead. And you keep repeating and repeating until you finish the pattern as you can see here. I apologize if this took too long, but I wanted to iterate through the loop as much as possible, simply to help clarify the iterative process, because many people become confused with this part. So I tried my best and I hope I was successful. Now, as an exercise, what I would like for you to do is, let me clear all of this, just as an exercise to practice jagged arrays. What I would like for you to do is, let me see if I can do this, copy it, paste it here, and delete this. Actually, maybe I can, yeah. So what I would like for you to do is print a pattern that is of this shape, and print a pattern of this shape, and print a pattern of this shape. So cover all directions. Try it and see how it is performed. I am not testing you, so feel free to resort to searches online if you need to, but try to experiment with different orientations so that you can familiarize yourself with jagged arrays and the iterative process of arrays. And that is it for today. I hope this video was helpful and beneficial to you all. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Be safe, take care, and peace be upon you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamin innaka hamidun majid.